Chapter 1, The Call to Adventure. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets of the small village of Eldenwood. The warm glow of lanterns flickered to life, one by one, as the townsfolk retreated to the safety of their homes. It was a quiet village, nestled deep within the forest, far from the troubles of the world, or so they thought. But tonight, a shadow darker than nightfall loomed over Eldenwood. Fear gripped the hearts of its people, and whispers of danger filled the air. The village, once peaceful, was now on edge. For deep within the ancient ruins that lay just beyond the forest's edge, something terrible had happened. As the night settled in, a group of seasoned adventurers gathered at the local inn, the Silver Oak. They had just returned from a successful hunt, eager to rest and share stories of their exploits. Little did they know, their evening would soon take a dark turn. Sound of heavy footsteps running, a door slamming open. The inn's door burst open, revealing a man and a woman, their faces etched with fear and desperation. The inn fell silent as all eyes turned to the couple. The woman clutched at her chest, struggling to catch her breath, while the man's hands trembled with urgency. "Mother! Please, please, you have to help us," she cried, her voice breaking with emotion. The goblins took our son." Gasps echoed through the inn, and the adventurers exchanged concerned glances. Goblins were a menace, sure, but for them to come so close to the village, and to steal a child, it was unheard of. "Father!" They dragged him into the old ruins, the father added, his voice hoarse from shouting. "We tried to follow, but, the maze, it's too dangerous. We barely made it out alive." The adventurers rose from their seats, their expressions hardening with resolve. They were no strangers to danger, and the thought of a child in the clutches of goblins ignited a fire within them. Thorn, a rogue with a sharp eye and quicker wit, stepped forward. His voice was calm, steady. "Fear not," he said, his gaze locking onto the parents. "We'll bring him back safely." Beside him, Lyra, a druid with the spirit of the wild in her veins, nodded in agreement. Her eyes, usually filled with the calm of the forest, now burned with determination. "We will find your son," she vowed, "and the goblins will pay for their treachery." The parents, though still fearful, seemed to find some comfort in the adventurer's words. The father gripped Thorn's arm tightly, his voice trembling as he whispered, thank you so much." With the promise of aid, the adventurers began to gather their gear, knowing that time was of the essence. The old ruins were a place of dark legend, a labyrinth of stone and shadow where many had entered, but few had returned. If the boy was to be saved, they would have to venture into the heart of that darkness and confront whatever dangers lurked within. As they prepared to leave, the weight of the task ahead settled over them like a heavy cloak. But they were adventurers, brave, bold, and undeterred by fear. For them, this was not just a mission, it was a call to adventure, a chance to prove their mettle and protect the innocent. And so, with the parents' pleas echoing in their ears, the adventurers stepped out into the night, ready to face whatever awaited them in the depths of the goblin maze. Sound of footsteps fading into the distance, a door creaking shut. The village of Eldenwood watched as their hope disappeared into the darkness. The fate of the boy now rested in the hands of these brave souls. The journey ahead would be fraught with peril, but one thing was certain, the adventurers would not rest until the child was safe, no matter the cost. Chapter 2, Gathering Information. The night had deepened, casting long shadows over the village of Eldenwood. The warm light of the Silver Oak Tavern spilled onto the cobblestone streets, inviting those seeking refuge from the cold and the fear that gripped the village. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and ale, but an uneasy silence had settled over the patrons. The adventurers, having promised to rescue the stolen child, knew they needed more information before venturing into the unknown. They returned to the tavern, their minds set on gathering whatever knowledge the villagers might have about the goblins and the ancient ruins where the boy was taken. Sound of low murmurs, clinking mugs, and the crackling of a fireplace. As the adventurers entered the tavern, the conversations halted, and all eyes turned toward them. The villagers were clearly troubled, and whispers of fear could be heard amongst the crowd. The adventurers made their way to a corner table, where the village elder, an old man with a face weathered by time, sat nursing a mug of ale. Thorn approached the elder, his voice soft but firm. "We need to know more about these ruins, and the goblins who have made them their home. What can you tell us?" "Village elder." The elder looked up, his eyes clouded with both age and sorrow. He sighed deeply before speaking. "The ruins," he began, his voice gravelly and low, "they've been there for as long as anyone can remember. Some say they were once a grand fortress, others say they were a temple to dark gods. But now, they're nothing but a cursed maze. Those who enter, never return." The adventurers listened intently as the elder's words hung heavy in the air. The villagers around them exchanged nervous glances, and one of them, a middle-aged woman with worry etched into her features, stepped forward. "Villager, woman. It wasn't always this way," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The goblins, they've always been a nuisance, but nothing more. But lately, they've grown bolder, more aggressive. It's as if something has awakened them, driven them to madness." Lyra's brow furrowed in concern. "What could be behind this change?" she asked, her voice laced with the wisdom of the wilds. "Goblins don't usually have the courage to attack a village outright." "Village elder." The elder shook his head, his expression grim. "No one knows for sure," he replied. "But there are rumors, whispers of a dark presence in the ruins. Some say it's a spirit, others say it's an ancient power that the goblins have somehow awoken. Whatever it is, it's dangerous, and it's using the goblins as its pawns." The adventurers exchanged uneasy glances. This was more than they had bargained for. A child stolen by goblins was one thing, but an ancient power stirring within a cursed maze was something else entirely. Grom, the fighter, clenched his fists, the sound of leather creaking under the strain. "Whatever it is," he growled, "we'll put an end to it. No cursed maze or goblin horde is going to stop us from saving that boy." Eldrin, the wizard, nodded in agreement, his mind already turning over the possibilities. "We must be cautious," he warned. "If there's a greater power at work, we'll need to be prepared for anything. But first, we must find the entrance to the maze and learn its layout. Does anyone here know the way?" Another villager, a young man with a weathered face, stepped forward. He had the look of someone who had spent years in the woods, a hunter by trade. "Villager, hunter." "I do," he said, his voice steady. "I've tracked game near the ruins before. The entrance is hidden beneath the roots of an old oak tree, deep in the forest. But be warned, the forest itself is treacherous at night, and the goblins have set traps for anyone who dares to approach." The adventurers took in the hunter's words, knowing that the journey ahead would be perilous. But their resolve was unshaken. They had faced dangers before, and this would be no different. The boy's life depended on them, and they would not fail. Thorn nodded to the hunter. "Thank you for your help. We'll leave at first light." He turned to the others, his expression determined. "Rest well tonight, for tomorrow, we venture into the unknown." As the adventurers made their way to their rooms, the weight of the task ahead pressed down on them. The villagers' warnings echoed in their minds, but so too did their promise to the boy's parents. No matter what dangers lay ahead, they would face them head-on, together. The night grew colder, and the shadows outside the tavern deepened. The adventurers knew that this was only the beginning of their journey, and that the true test of their courage awaited them within the depths of the cursed maze. Sound of the tavern door creaking, wind howling outside. And so, as the village of Eldenwood slept fitfully, the adventurers prepared themselves for the trials to come. The goblins had grown bolder, something sinister stirred in the ruins, and the maze awaited, dark and deadly. But the adventurers had a mission, to save an innocent life and bring light to the shadows. Tomorrow, they would enter the maze. And whatever evil awaited them, they would face it with unwavering resolve. Chapter 3, Entering the Maze. Dawn broke over the village of Eldenwood, casting a pale light over the mist-shrouded forest. The villagers, who had gathered in the early morning, watched with a mix of hope and fear as the adventurers made their final preparations. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but the adventurers were ready. Their mission was clear: rescue the boy from the clutches of the goblins and uncover the dark secret that lay within the ancient ruins. The group set off at first light, guided by the hunter who had provided them with directions the night before. The forest loomed before them, dense and foreboding, the trees standing like silent sentinels guarding the secrets of the old ruins. The air was thick with anticipation, every step taking them closer to the heart of the maze. Sound of footsteps crunching on leaves, birds calling in the distance. As they made their way deeper into the forest, the trees grew taller and more twisted, their gnarled roots clawing at the earth like ancient hands. The sun struggled to penetrate the thick canopy above, casting the forest floor in eerie, dappled shadows. The air was cool, but there was a tension, a sense that something was watching them from the darkness. At last, they reached the entrance to the ruins, just as the hunter had described, a massive oak tree, its roots spread wide and deep, revealing a dark opening beneath. The entrance to the maze. Lyra knelt beside the opening, her hand brushing against the ancient bark. "This tree is older than the village itself," she whispered, her voice filled with reverence. "It has seen countless seasons pass, and now it guards the entrance to this dark place." Thorn, ever the practical one, peered into the darkness of the entrance. "Guarding, or hiding," he muttered, his eyes narrowing. "Let's not waste any more time. The longer we wait, the deeper the goblins take the boy." With a final nod to the hunter, who wished them luck before retreating back to the safety of the village, the adventurers descended into the maze. The air grew colder as they moved deeper underground, the walls of the tunnel closing in around them. The stone walls were damp with moisture, and the sound of dripping water echoed through the dark passages. Sound of footsteps echoing in a stone corridor, water dripping. The maze was as the villagers had described, twisting and turning, with no clear path. The adventurers moved cautiously, their senses heightened as they navigated the labyrinth of tunnels. Thorn took the lead, his sharp eyes scanning the ground for traps, while Lyra listened intently to the whispers of the earth, trying to sense the presence of the goblins. Grom's voice rumbled through the darkness. "This place gives me the creeps," he muttered, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "It's too quiet. Goblins aren't known for being this stealthy." Eldrin, the wizard, nodded in agreement. "It's as if the maze itself is alive," he observed, his voice thoughtful. "I can feel the magic in the air, old, powerful, and dangerous. We must be careful. This place is more than just a hiding spot for goblins." As they ventured further, the maze seemed to shift around them, the passages changing, leading them in circles. It was as if the maze was trying to confuse them, to keep them from reaching their goal. The adventurers remained vigilant, marking their path and using every trick they knew to keep track of their progress. But the deeper they went, the more they realized that the maze was not just a physical challenge. It was a test of their will, their resolve. The walls seemed to close in on them, the darkness pressing down, the air growing thick and stifling. It was as if the maze was feeding off their fear, growing stronger with every step they took. Lyra paused, her hand resting against the cold stone wall. "This isn't natural," she murmured, her voice laced with concern. "The maze, it's alive. It's reacting to us, trying to trap us. We need to stay together, stay focused." Thorn nodded, his jaw set in determination. "We will," he replied, his voice steady. "We've faced worse than this. We just need to keep moving, and we'll find the boy." The adventurers pressed on, their resolve unshaken, but the maze continued to test them. The passages grew narrower, the air colder, and the sense of danger more palpable. But they knew they had no choice, they had to keep going, had to find the boy before it was too late. Sound of faint, distant goblin laughter echoing through the tunnels. Suddenly, a faint sound reached their ears, laughter, high-pitched and sinister, echoing through the tunnels. The goblins were close. The adventurers exchanged tense glances, their hands moving to their weapons. They had finally reached the heart of the maze, where the goblins lurked. But as they prepared to face the creatures, they knew that the goblins were not the only threat. The maze itself was alive, and it would do everything in its power to keep them from rescuing the boy. The real battle was just beginning. Sound of weapons being drawn, footsteps moving forward cautiously. With a final breath, the adventurers steeled themselves for what lay ahead. The darkness closed in around them, but they were ready. They would not leave this place without the boy. No matter what the maze threw at them, they would overcome it, together. And so, with the echoes of goblin laughter growing louder, they ventured deeper into the maze, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them. Chapter 4, The First Encounter. Narrator. The darkness within the maze was oppressive, thick and almost tangible, as if it were alive and waiting to swallow the adventurers whole. The flickering light of their torches barely penetrated the gloom, casting long, dancing shadows along the damp stone walls. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and decay, each breath carrying the cold bite of the underground. The adventurers moved cautiously, their senses on high alert. The distant echoes of goblin laughter had grown louder, closer, and more sinister. Every step forward brought with it the certainty that they were not alone in the maze. The goblins were waiting, lurking in the shadows, ready to strike. Sound of soft footsteps, the occasional clinking of armor, and muffled breathing. Thorn, ever vigilant, led the way, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. His dagger was drawn, the blade glinting faintly in the torchlight. Behind him, Grom's massive frame loomed, his sword gripped tightly in his hands, ready for the first sign of trouble. "We're close," Thorn whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of their footsteps. "Stay sharp. They're just ahead." Lyra moved with a quiet grace, her senses attuned to the subtle shifts in the air. She could feel the presence of the goblins, the foul energy that clung to the walls of the maze. It was as if the very stone around them was steeped in the malice of these creatures. "There's something wrong," Lyra murmured, her voice tinged with unease. "I can feel it, the goblins, they're not just hiding. They're waiting for us." Eldrin, the wizard, furrowed his brow in thought. "Waiting," he echoed, his mind racing. "But why? Goblins aren't known for their patience. What could they be planning?" Before Lyra could answer, the air around them suddenly shifted. The cold grew more intense, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the tunnel. The adventurers froze, their eyes darting around in the darkness, searching for the source of the sound. Sound of a growl echoing, the faint shuffling of feet. Out of the shadows, a group of goblins emerged, their yellow eyes gleaming with malice. They were small, hunched creatures, their skin a sickly green, their mouths twisted into wicked grins. Each one held a crude weapon, a rusty dagger, a splintered club, a jagged piece of bone. They were not numerous, but their eyes were filled with a cruel intelligence, something unusual for creatures of their kind. The largest of the goblins, their leader, stepped forward, his voice a low snarl. "You shouldn't have come here, humans," he hissed, his words thick with menace. "This place belongs to us now, and you'll never leave it alive." Grom stepped forward, his sword raised. "We're not leaving without the boy," he growled back, his voice a deep rumble of defiance. "Stand aside, or face the consequences." The goblin leader sneered, his sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. "The boy," he spat, his eyes narrowing. "He's ours now. The master has plans for him, plans you'll never understand." Eldrin's eyes narrowed as he heard the goblin's words. "The master," he repeated, his voice laced with suspicion. "What are you talking about? What master?" But the goblin leader only laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the tunnel. He raised his weapon, signaling the others to attack. Sound of goblins chattering excitedly, weapons being drawn. The battle began with a sudden, violent clash. The goblins rushed forward, their shrill cries filling the air. Thorn moved with lightning speed, his dagger flashing as he struck down the first goblin that came at him. Grom swung his sword in a wide arc, cutting through the goblins like a scythe through wheat. Lyra called upon the power of nature, summoning vines from the ground to entangle the goblins' feet, slowing their advance. "Stay together!" Lyra shouted, her voice commanding. "Don't let them separate us." Eldrin, standing at the back, began to weave a spell, his hands tracing intricate patterns in the air. He spoke words of power, and a burst of flame shot forth from his fingertips, engulfing a group of goblins in fire. They shrieked in pain, their bodies consumed by the magical flames. "There's something more here," Eldrin called out, his eyes searching the darkness beyond the goblins. "I can feel it, something powerful, something dark." Despite the goblins' ferocity, the adventurers fought with skill and determination. They had faced worse foes before, and they knew how to work as a team. But as the last of the goblins fell, their twisted bodies crumpling to the ground, the adventurers realized that the true danger had yet to reveal itself. The air around them grew colder still, and the shadows seemed to stretch and writhe as if alive. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and from the darkness, a deep, resonant voice echoed through the tunnels, a voice that sent a chill down their spines. Mysterious voice. "Fools!" The voice boomed, filled with ancient malice. "You think you can stop me? The boy is mine, and soon, so too will be your lives." The adventurers stood frozen, their hearts pounding in their chests. This was no mere goblin leader they faced, this was something far more dangerous, something far more powerful. The maze was alive with dark magic, and whatever force had taken control of it was far beyond what they had imagined. But despite the fear that gripped them, the adventurers stood their ground. They had come too far to turn back now. Whatever this dark force was, they would face it head-on. The boy's life depended on it, and they would not fail. Sound of the ground trembling, the ominous echo of the mysterious voice fading into silence. With the last of the goblins defeated, the adventurers gathered their strength, their resolve unshaken. They knew that the battle ahead would be their greatest challenge yet, but they were ready. Together, they would fight whatever darkness lurked within the maze, and they would not stop until the boy was safe. As the echoes of the mysterious voice faded into the shadows, the adventurers moved forward, deeper into the heart of the maze, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them. Chapter 5: The Maze's Secret. The adventurers pressed forward, their hearts heavy with the weight of the unknown. The maze had revealed its first secret, a dark, malevolent presence that seemed to pulse through the very stone walls. The encounter with the goblins had shaken them, but they knew that the real threat lay deeper within the labyrinth. The mysterious voice that had echoed through the tunnels still lingered in their minds, a grim reminder of the power they now faced. The passageways twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the darkness. Every step was a battle against the oppressive air, the cold seeping into their bones. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the faint light of their torches struggled to push back the shadows. But they had no choice. They had to keep moving forward, to uncover the secrets of the maze and save the boy. Sound of footsteps echoing, the distant drip of water, and the occasional creak of stone. As they ventured further into the maze, the adventurers noticed a change in the air. The cold was no longer just physical, it carried with it a sense of dread, a palpable fear that gnawed at their resolve. The walls of the maze were no longer just stone, they were carved with strange symbols, runes that glowed faintly in the torchlight, their meaning lost to time but their power unmistakable. Eldrin paused, his eyes narrowing as he studied the runes. "These symbols," he muttered, his voice filled with concern. "They're ancient, far older than the ruins themselves. This place, it's not just a maze. It's a prison, designed to contain something powerful and dangerous." Lyra ran her fingers over the carved stone, her expression one of unease. "These runes, they're binding spells," she said softly. "Whatever is trapped here, it's been sealed away for a reason. We're dealing with something far more dangerous than goblins." Grom's grip tightened on his sword. "Then we'll do what we came here to do," he said gruffly. "We find the boy, and we get out. Whatever this thing is, we won't let it stop us." But even as Grom spoke, the ground beneath their feet trembled, and a low, rumbling sound echoed through the tunnels. The maze seemed to respond to their presence, the air growing colder, the darkness thicker. The runes on the walls flared brighter for a moment before dimming again, as if the very maze was warning them of the danger ahead. Sound of the ground rumbling, stone shifting, and distant, ominous echoes. The adventurers continued forward, their senses heightened, every shadow a potential threat. The passageways grew narrower, the walls pressing in on them, the air becoming stifling. But they pushed on, determined to reach the heart of the maze and confront whatever darkness lay within. Finally, they reached a large, circular chamber, the walls covered in the same ancient runes. In the center of the chamber stood a massive stone altar, its surface etched with the same glowing symbols. The air in the chamber was thick with power, a tangible force that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Thorn moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the chamber. "This place, it's the source," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever power is controlling the maze, it's coming from here." As the adventurers approached the altar, they noticed something lying on its surface, an ancient, tattered book, its pages yellowed with age. The book was open, its pages filled with strange symbols and diagrams, but the language was unfamiliar to them. Eldrin's eyes widened as he examined the book. This is a spell book," he said, his voice filled with awe. "A powerful one, at that. Whoever wrote this was no ordinary mage. This is dark magic, the kind that can twist reality itself." But before they could study the book further, the ground shook violently, and a deep, resonant voice filled the chamber, the same voice that had haunted them in the tunnels. Mysterious voice. "You dare to enter my domain?" the voice thundered, filled with ancient fury. "Fools! You cannot stop what is already in motion. The boy is mine, and through him, I will rise again." The chamber shook as the voice spoke, the runes on the walls flaring with a brilliant, blinding light. The adventurers braced themselves, their weapons ready, as the darkness around them seemed to come alive, swirling and coalescing into a massive, shadowy figure. Sound of the ground shaking, the voice echoing, and the shadows swirling into a figure. The figure towered over them, its form shifting and writhing, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. This was no mere goblin or dark spirit, this was an ancient, powerful being, bound within the maze for centuries, now awakened and thirsting for revenge. Lyra's voice was filled with urgency. "We have to stop it," she cried. "If this creature escapes, it could destroy everything." Grom's voice was firm, resolute. "Then we fight," he said, stepping forward, his sword raised. "We've come this far, we're not turning back now." But even as Grom spoke, the creature's voice boomed through the chamber, filled with dark amusement. Mysterious voice. "You cannot stop me," it hissed, its voice dripping with malice. "The boy's life force is mine, and through him, I will break the chains that bind me." The adventurers exchanged tense glances, their minds racing. They knew they couldn't defeat this creature through brute force alone. They had to find a way to sever its connection to the boy, to break the spell that bound the boy's life force to the creature. Eldrin's eyes widened as a thought struck him. "The spell book," he exclaimed. "There must be something in there, some way to reverse the ritual, to break the connection." Sound of pages being rapidly flipped, the creature's voice growing more agitated. Lyra and Thorn moved to guard Eldrin as he frantically flipped through the pages of the spellbook, searching for the counterspell. Grom stood ready, his sword raised, prepared to defend his companions from the creature's wrath. But the creature was growing impatient. It lashed out with a wave of dark energy, the force of it sending the adventurers stumbling back. Sound of a magical blast, the adventurers grunting as they are pushed back. Mysterious voice. "You cannot stop what has already begun," the creature roared, its form growing larger, more solid. "The boy is mine, and through him, I will rise again." Eldrin's hands trembled as he found the page he was looking for, a complex, ancient ritual that could sever the bond between the boy and the creature. But it required time, and the creature was growing stronger with every passing moment. "I found it!" Eldrin shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "But I need time, hold it off while I cast the spell." Grom nodded, his jaw set in determination. "You heard him," he barked. "Keep that thing away from Eldrin, no matter what." The adventurers rallied, their resolve unshaken. They had faced countless dangers before, and they would not let this creature stop them now. Together, they stood against the darkness, ready to fight with everything they had to save the boy and stop the creature from escaping its prison. Sound of weapons clashing, magic crackling, and the creature roaring in anger. The battle for the boy's life, and the fate of the village, had begun. Chapter 6, The Ritual Begins. The battle raged within the heart of the maze, the adventurers standing against the towering shadowy figure that sought to break free from its ancient prison. The creature's presence filled the chamber with an oppressive darkness, its form shifting and writhing like a storm of pure malice. Each strike it delivered sent shockwaves through the room, shaking the very foundations of the labyrinth. Eldrin, the wizard, was hunched over the ancient spellbook, his eyes darting across the pages as he chanted the words of the counterspell. His voice was steady but strained, every syllable resonating with arcane power. He knew that the ritual was the only way to sever the dark bond between the creature and the boy. But the spell was complex and required perfect focus, something increasingly difficult to maintain in the midst of the chaos. Sound of Eldrin chanting, the creature's roars, and the clash of weapons. As Eldrin began the ritual, the air around him shimmered with magical energy, the runes on the altar flaring to life. The power of the spell was palpable, a force that hummed through the very stone of the maze. But the creature sensed the danger, and its fury grew. It lashed out with tendrils of shadow, attempting to disrupt Eldrin's concentration and halt the ritual. Mysterious voice. "You dare defy me?" the creature bellowed, its voice a thunderous roar that shook the walls. "You think your magic can stop me? I will rend your souls apart and feast upon your fear." Thorn, ever quick and agile, darted between the shadows, his blades flashing as he struck at the tendrils, severing them before they could reach Eldrin. Grum stood firm at the front, his sword cleaving through the darkness with powerful, sweeping strikes. Lyra channeled the forces of nature, vines and roots bursting from the ground to entangle the creature's form, holding it at bay as best they could. "We've got your back, Eldrin!" Thorn called out, his voice filled with determination. "Just keep that spell going." Grum grunted in agreement, his sword slicing through another wave of shadows. "We're not letting this thing get anywhere near you," he growled, his muscles straining with the effort of holding the creature back. But the creature was relentless, its power overwhelming. It roared in fury, its shadowy form expanding, pushing against the walls of the chamber as if testing the limits of its prison. The very air seemed to vibrate with its anger, and the adventurers struggled to hold their ground. "We can't keep this up forever," Lyra shouted, her voice tinged with desperation. "Eldrin, how much longer?" Eldrin's voice was strained as he continued the ritual, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "Just a little more time," he called back, his hands moving with precision as he traced the symbols in the air. "I'm almost there." As Eldrin's chant grew louder, the runes on the altar began to glow brighter, their light filling the chamber with a harsh, white brilliance. The creature shrieked in pain, its form recoiling from the light as if it were being burned by it. The spell was working, the bond was weakening. But the creature would not be defeated so easily. With a final, desperate surge of power, it lashed out at the adventurers with all its might, its shadowy form expanding into a swirling vortex of darkness that threatened to consume them all. Sound of the creature's roar, the rushing of wind, and the adventurers struggling to stand their ground. The adventurers were thrown back, their bodies slamming against the stone walls as the force of the attack hit them. The torches were extinguished, plunging the chamber into darkness. For a moment, it seemed as if all hope was lost, that the creature's power was too great for them to overcome. But even in the darkness, Eldrin's voice rang out, clear and unwavering, as he spoke the final words of the ritual. "By the light of the Ancient Ones, I sever the bonds of darkness. I banish thee to the void from whence you came." Sound of a magical explosion, the creature's roar of pain, and a blinding flash of light. With a final, brilliant flash of light, the runes on the altar erupted in a blaze of pure energy, and the creature screamed, a sound of pure agony, as if its very essence were being torn apart. The vortex of shadows imploded, collapsing in on itself as the light consumed it. The creature's form disintegrated, its power unraveling as the bond between it and the boy was severed. For a moment, there was only silence. The adventurers lay on the cold stone floor, their bodies bruised and battered, the light of the runes slowly fading as the power of the ritual dissipated. Sound of fading echoes, the distant drip of water, and the heavy breathing of the adventurers. Finally, the darkness lifted, and the chamber was still. The creature was gone, its presence erased from the maze, its threat vanquished. The boy was safe, the spell had been broken. But as the adventurers slowly rose to their feet, they knew that their journey was not yet over. The boy was still somewhere within the maze, and they had to find him before it was too late. Grum grunted as he pulled himself up, his muscles aching from the battle. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice weary. Lyra nodded, her eyes scanning the chamber. "The creature is gone," she confirmed, her voice tinged with relief. "But we have to find the boy. He's still in danger." Thorn sheathed his blades, his eyes narrowing as he looked around. "Then let's move," he said, his tone determined. "We didn't come all this way just to lose him now." Eldrin, still holding the spellbook, took a deep breath and nodded. "The ritual worked," he said, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "The boy should be close by. Let's finish this." With renewed resolve, the adventurers prepared to continue their search. The battle had been fierce, but they had emerged victorious. Now, only one task remained, to find the boy and bring him safely back to his parents. Sound of footsteps as the adventurers moved out of the chamber, the distant echoes of the maze. The adventurers left the chamber behind, their hearts lightened by their victory, but their minds still focused on the task at hand. They had faced the darkness and won, but the maze was still a place of danger. Together, they would navigate its twisting corridors, overcome whatever challenges remained, and rescue the boy. The maze had tried to defeat them, but they had proven their strength. Now, they would prove their courage. Chapter 7, The Final Confrontation. The adventurers moved swiftly through the maze, the echoes of their battle still lingering in their minds. Though they had defeated the dark creature and severed its bond with the boy, the maze remained a treacherous place, filled with hidden dangers. They had come too far to fail now, the boy's life depended on their success. The passageways twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the labyrinth. The oppressive darkness had lifted, but the air was still thick with an uneasy tension, as if the maze itself was resisting their progress. Every shadow seemed to watch them, every sound a potential threat. But the adventurers pressed on, determined to find the boy and bring him to safety. Sound of footsteps echoing, the distant drip of water, and the faint rustling of stone. After what felt like hours of navigating the maze, they finally reached a large, open chamber. In the center of the room, lying on a cold stone floor, was the boy. His small figure looked fragile and pale, as if the darkness of the maze had drained the life from him. The adventurers' hearts clenched at the sight. They had found him, but was it too late? Lyra rushed forward, her hands glowing with a soft, green light as she knelt beside the boy. "He's alive," she whispered, relief flooding her voice. "But he's weak. We need to get him out of here, quickly." Grum stepped forward, his voice firm. "Then let's not waste any time. We'll carry him if we have to, but we're getting him out of this cursed place." But as Grum moved to lift the boy, the air in the chamber shifted, growing colder. The light from their torches flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. And then, from the darkness, a low, guttural growl echoed through the room, a sound that sent a chill down their spines. They had defeated the creature, but they were not alone. Sound of a deep growl, the rustling of movement in the shadows. Thorn's eyes narrowed, his hand instinctively reaching for his daggers. "We've got company," he muttered, his voice tense. Looks like the goblins weren't the only ones drawn to the boy. From the shadows, a group of goblins emerged, their eyes gleaming with malice. But these were no ordinary goblins, they were larger, more vicious, their bodies twisted and corrupted by the dark magic that had permeated the maze. They snarled and hissed, their weapons gleaming in the dim light as they advanced on the adventurers. Eldrin's grip tightened on his staff, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "These goblins have been corrupted by the creature's power," he said. "They're not going to let us leave without a fight." Grum drew his sword, his expression grim. "Then we'll give them one," he said, his voice filled with determination. "Lyra, stay with the boy. The rest of us will handle these creatures." The adventurers formed a protective circle around the boy, their weapons ready as the goblins closed in. The air crackled with tension, the silence before the storm. They had faced worse odds before, but the stakes had never been higher. This time, they were not just fighting for their own lives, they were fighting to save an innocent child. Sound of weapons being drawn, the growls of goblins, and the tense silence before battle. With a sudden, feral cry, the goblins attacked, their twisted forms lunging at the adventurers with savage fury. The chamber erupted into chaos as the two sides clashed, steel meeting steel, magic crackling through the air. Sound of battle, swords clashing, spells being cast, goblins screeching. Grom was a force of nature, his sword cleaving through the goblins with brutal efficiency. Each strike was precise, driven by the need to protect the boy and his companions. Beside him, Thorn moved like a shadow, his daggers flashing as he struck down goblin after goblin, his movements quick and deadly. Eldrin stood at the center, his staff glowing with arcane energy as he unleashed a barrage of spells, fire and lightning cutting through the ranks of goblins. The air was filled with the sounds of battle, the cries of the goblins growing more desperate as the adventurers pushed them back. But the goblins were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. For every one they struck down, another two took its place, their corrupted forms driven by a single-minded hunger for destruction. Lyra knelt beside the boy, her hands glowing with healing magic as she tried to stabilize him. But even as she worked, her eyes were drawn to the battle, her heart pounding with fear for her companions. "Stay with me, little one," she whispered to the boy, her voice soothing despite the chaos around them. "We're almost out of here. Just a little longer." The battle raged on, the adventurers growing weary as the goblins pressed their attack. It was a fight of attrition, a test of endurance as much as skill. But they could not afford to lose, they had to win, for the boy's sake. Finally, with a powerful strike, Grom cleaved through the last of the goblins, their bodies falling to the ground in a twisted heap. The chamber fell silent once more, the only sound the heavy breathing of the adventurers and the distant echo of dripping water. Sound of the last goblin falling, the adventurers panting from exertion. They had won. The goblins were defeated, their twisted forms lying still on the cold stone floor. But the victory was bittersweet, there was no time to celebrate. The boy was still in danger, and the maze was still a place of dark magic. Grom wiped the sweat from his brow, his voice gruff but relieved. "Is he all right?" he asked, his eyes on the boy. Lyra nodded, her hands still glowing with healing light. "He's weak, but he'll make it," she replied, her voice gentle. "But we need to get him out of here, now. The maze won't stay quiet for long." The adventurers quickly gathered themselves, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. They had faced the darkness of the maze and emerged victorious, but the journey was not over yet. With the boy safely in their care, they prepared to make their way out of the labyrinth, knowing that the path ahead would be fraught with danger. But they were determined. They had come to rescue the boy, and they would not leave without him. Together, they would find their way out of the maze and return to the village, victorious. Sound of footsteps as the adventurers began to move, the distant echoes of the maze. The adventurers left the chamber behind, the darkness of the maze still pressing in on them. But they were not afraid. They had faced the worst the maze had to offer and had triumphed. Now, they would see their mission through to the end. The boy was safe, but the journey home had just begun. Chapter 8, The Long Way Out. With the boy cradled safely in Lyra's arms, the adventurers began their trek back through the twisting, shadow-filled corridors of the maze. The once foreboding labyrinth now seemed less menacing, the darkness no longer oppressive but merely a reminder of the dangers they had overcome. Still, every step forward was taken with caution, for they knew the maze had not yet relinquished all its secrets. Their minds were focused on the journey ahead, finding the way out, avoiding the traps that had claimed so many before them, and returning the boy to his desperate parents. But even as they walked, the weight of what they had faced lingered in the air, a somber reminder of the dark forces that had nearly claimed them. Sound of quiet footsteps echoing through the maze, distant drips of water. The passageways stretched on, the maze winding and twisting in seemingly endless loops. Despite their efforts to navigate the maze's tricks, the adventurers found themselves retracing their steps more than once. The walls seemed to shift, the path ahead changing each time they turned a corner. It was as if the maze itself was alive, attempting to keep them trapped within its depths. Thorn's keen eyes scanned the walls, searching for any sign or clue that might lead them out. "This place is playing tricks on us," he muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. "We're going in circles." Grum frowned, his brow furrowed in concentration as he studied the path ahead. "There's got to be a way out," he said, his voice determined. "We just have to keep moving forward. We can't afford to lose hope now." Eldrin, ever the scholar, traced his fingers along the ancient runes etched into the walls. "The magic of this place is strong," he observed, his voice thoughtful. "But it's weakening. The ritual we performed has disrupted the dark power that held this maze together. We should be able to find our way out if we stay focused." Their confidence bolstered by Eldrin's words, the adventurers pressed on, their determination unyielding. The walls of the maze seemed to whisper around them, a distant hum of ancient magic that sought to ensnare them, but they were undeterred. They had faced greater challenges, and they would not be defeated by a labyrinth of stone. Time seemed to blur as they moved through the maze, the passage of minutes and hours indistinguishable in the dark, twisting corridors. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, they found themselves standing before a familiar doorway, one they had passed through on their way in. Lyra's eyes lit up with recognition, her voice filled with relief. "We're close," she said, glancing down at the boy in her arms. "We're almost out." The adventurers quickened their pace, their spirits lifting as they realized they were on the right path. The air grew lighter, the oppressive weight of the maze's magic lessening with each step they took. They could feel the pull of the outside world, the promise of freedom just beyond the next corner. Sound of footsteps growing faster, the distant sound of wind. But as they rounded the final bend, their hopes were nearly dashed. Standing between them and the exit was a final obstacle, a massive, stone door, sealed shut by an intricate locking mechanism. The door was adorned with runes, the same dark magic that had permeated the maze now acting as their final barrier to freedom. Grum stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the door. "Another puzzle," he muttered, his voice tinged with frustration. "This maze doesn't want to let us go." Thorn moved closer, his keen eyes examining the lock with the practiced expertise of a rogue. "I've seen this kind of mechanism before," he said, his voice calm and focused. "It's complex, but I can handle it. Just give me a moment." As Thorn began to work on the lock, the others stood guard, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. The tension in the air was palpable, the final hurdle between them and freedom was right before them, but the maze's tricks had not yet been fully revealed. Sound of Thorn working on the lock, the faint clicking of metal. Thorn's fingers moved with practiced precision, each click of the lock bringing them closer to freedom. But as he worked, a faint rumbling began to echo through the maze, the walls vibrating with the sound of stone shifting. The maze was reacting to their attempt to escape, its magic stirring once more. The door began to glow with a faint, eerie light, the runes pulsing with dark energy. It was a race against time. Thorn had to unlock the door before the maze's magic could seal them in for good. Eldrin's voice was tense as he readied his staff, his eyes locked on the glowing runes. "Hurry, Thorn," he urged, his voice filled with urgency. "The magic is growing stronger. We don't have much time." Thorn's brow furrowed in concentration, his fingers working faster as the rumbling grew louder. Finally, with a final click, the lock gave way, and the massive stone door slowly began to creak open, revealing the bright light of the outside world beyond. Sound of the door unlocking and creaking open, the rush of wind from outside. The adventurers didn't hesitate. With the boy in their care, they rushed through the doorway, leaving the dark, twisted corridors of the maze behind. The cool, fresh air of the outside world filled their lungs, the light of day a welcome sight after the oppressive darkness of the labyrinth. They had done it. They had escaped. Lyra's voice was filled with relief as she looked down at the boy, who was beginning to stir in her arms. "We're safe now," she whispered, a gentle smile on her face. "You're going home." The adventurers stepped out into the open, the sunlight warm on their faces. The entrance to the maze loomed behind them, its dark magic now nothing more than a fading memory. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, the boys safe in their care. The journey had been long and perilous, but they had succeeded. As they began the walk back to the village, their hearts were light, their spirits lifted by the knowledge that they had overcome the maze's challenges and rescued the boy. The road ahead was clear, and soon they would return him to his parents, who waited anxiously for their return. Sound of footsteps on gravel, the distant chirping of birds, and the rustle of leaves in the wind. But even as they walked, the adventurers knew that their journey was not truly over. The boy was safe, but the dark magic they had encountered was a reminder that evil still lurked in the world. There would be more battles to fight, more adventures to undertake. But for now, they could rest, knowing that they had made a difference, that they had saved a life. The village awaited, the sun shining brightly as they walked toward it. They had faced the maze and its horrors, and they had won. The boy was safe, and soon, they would be home. Chapter 9, The Return. The sun was high in the sky as the adventurers made their way back to the village, the boy resting in Lyra's arms. The weight of their journey through the maze hung heavy on their shoulders, but the warmth of the sun and the familiar sights of the countryside began to lift their spirits. They had faced darkness and despair, but they were emerging into the light once more. The path wound through fields and forests, the sounds of nature a stark contrast to the eerie silence of the maze. As they walked, the boy began to stir, his eyes fluttering open as he woke from the deep, unnatural sleep that had held him captive. Sound of footsteps on a dirt path, birds singing, leaves rustling in the breeze. The boy's eyes opened slowly, his gaze unfocused at first as he took in his surroundings. For a moment, he seemed disoriented, the memories of the maze still fresh in his mind. But as he looked up and saw Lyra's gentle smile, a flicker of recognition and relief crossed his face. The boy's voice was weak, but filled with gratitude. You saved me?" he asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Lyra nodded, her voice soft and reassuring. "Yes, little one," she said, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "You're safe now. We're taking you home." The boy's eyes filled with tears, a mix of relief and emotion overwhelming him. He buried his face in Lyra's shoulder, his small body trembling as he held on to her. It was the first time he had felt safe since the goblins had taken him, and the reality of his rescue was almost too much to bear. The adventurers exchanged glances, their hearts warming at the sight. They had faced countless dangers and challenges, but seeing the boy safe and on his way back to his family made it all worthwhile. Grom's voice was gruff but kind as he spoke, his eyes softening as he looked at the boy. "You're a brave lad," he said, giving the boy a reassuring pat on the back. "Your parents will be proud of you." The boy looked up at Grom, his eyes still glistening with tears, but a small smile beginning to form on his lips. For the first time since his ordeal began, he felt a glimmer of hope. As they continued down the path, the village came into view in the distance, the smoke from chimneys rising into the clear blue sky. The sight of home filled the boy with anticipation, his heart beating faster as they drew closer. Thorn's keen eyes scanned the horizon, spotting movement near the village gates. "Looks like someone's waiting for us," he remarked, a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. As they approached the village, they saw a group of people gathered near the entrance, their expressions tense and anxious. Among them were the boy's parents, their eyes scanning the road, searching for any sign of their child. When they finally saw the adventurers, and the small figure in Lyra's arms, a cry of joy and relief went up from the crowd. The boy's mother broke into a run, her face a mix of tears and smiles as she rushed toward them. The boy, seeing his mother, squirmed in Lyra's arms, reaching out to her with desperate eagerness. The mother's voice was choked with emotion as she called out, "My son. My baby." Lyra gently set the boy down, and he ran into his mother's arms, the two of them embracing tightly. Tears flowed freely as the mother held her son close, her relief palpable. The father joined them, wrapping his arms around both of them, his own eyes filled with gratitude. The father looked up at the adventurers, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling. "Thank you for bringing our son back to us." The adventurers nodded, their hearts swelling with pride. This was why they did what they did, why they faced danger and darkness without hesitation. The joy of reuniting a family, of saving an innocent life, was a reward far greater than any treasure. Eldrin's voice was gentle as he spoke, his eyes on the reunited family. "He's a strong boy," he said, a soft smile on his lips. "He'll recover, given time and care." The villagers gathered around, their voices filled with praise and thanks as they welcomed the adventurers back. The boy's parents, overwhelmed with gratitude, insisted on throwing a feast in their honor, a celebration of the boy's safe return and the adventurers' bravery. As the sun began to set, the village square was filled with light and laughter, the dark memories of the maze fading in the warm glow of the evening. The adventurers were hailed as heroes, their names spoken with reverence as the villagers recounted the tale of their journey. But for the adventurers, the greatest reward was the sight of the boy, now safe and surrounded by his loving family. The horrors of the maze had been left behind, and the future was bright with possibilities. Sound of villagers laughing and talking, the crackle of a bonfire, and the clinking of mugs. As the feast continued, the adventurers found a moment of peace, sitting together at a table laden with food and drink. They had faced the darkness of the maze and emerged victorious, and now they could rest, knowing that they had made a difference. But even as they celebrated, they knew that their journey was not truly over. The world was full of dangers and mysteries, and there would always be new adventures to undertake, new lives to save. For now, though, they were content to enjoy the moment, the warmth of the fire, and the company of friends. They had earned this rest, and they would savor it before the next call to adventure came. The boy, now safe and sound, played nearby, his laughter a joyful sound that filled the square. The adventurers watched him with fond smiles, knowing that they had given him a future free from the darkness that had once threatened to consume him. And as the night wore on, they knew that they would be ready when the next call came. For they were adventurers, and their journey would never truly end. Chapter 10, A Hero's Rest. The village was bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun as the adventurers prepared to take their leave. The feast in their honor had stretched long into the night, the villagers celebrating their victory and the safe return of the boy. But now, as dawn broke over the horizon, it was time for the adventurers to move on. The boy and his parents stood at the edge of the village, their eyes filled with gratitude and admiration. The bond formed between the adventurers and the villagers during the rescue mission had grown strong, and parting was bittersweet. But the road called to the adventurers, as it always did, and they knew their journey was far from over. Sound of birds chirping, the gentle rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. The adventurers gathered their gear, their hearts light despite the long road ahead. They had faced the darkness of the maze and emerged victorious, and now, with their spirits renewed, they were ready for whatever lay ahead. The boy, now safe and back with his family, stood close to his parents, his eyes wide with admiration as he watched the adventurers prepare to leave. In his young heart, they had become heroes, figures of legend who had braved the depths of the earth to save him from the clutches of evil. The boy's voice was soft, filled with awe as he spoke. "Will you be going on more adventures?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the adventurers. Grum smiled down at the boy, his voice warm and kind. "Aye, lad," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. "There's always another adventure out there, another wrong to right. But you remember this, you're a part of our story now. You're as brave as any warrior." The boy's chest puffed out with pride at Grom's words, a bright smile spreading across his face. He had faced fear and darkness, but now he was safe, and the memory of his ordeal was already beginning to fade, replaced by the joy of being home. The adventurers exchanged a final round of farewells with the villagers, their hearts warmed by the gratitude and admiration in the eyes of those they had saved. The bond between hero and villager was strong, and though their paths might diverge, they knew they would always be remembered. Thorn, ever the rogue with a sharp wit, leaned down to the boy, his voice teasing but kind. "Keep your wits about you, lad," he said, handing the boy a small token, a silver coin engraved with a mysterious symbol. "A little luck never hurts." The boy accepted the coin with wide eyes, his fingers curling around it tightly. To him, it was more than just a token, it was a symbol of the adventure he had survived, a reminder of the heroes who had saved him. With their farewells said and their hearts light, the adventurers turned to the road. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the land, and the promise of new adventures filled the air. As they walked away from the village, the boy watched them go, his eyes shining with admiration and something else, determination. For in his heart, he knew that one day, he too would be a hero. He would take up the mantle of adventurer and follow in their footsteps, facing the dangers of the world with courage and honor. Sound of footsteps on gravel, the distant chatter of villagers fading as the adventurers walk away. The road stretched out before the adventurers, full of possibilities and unknown dangers. But they were ready. Together, they had faced the darkness and won, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The village was soon out of sight, but the memory of their journey would remain with them always, a reminder of the boy they had saved and the lives they had touched. They were heroes, not just because of the battles they fought, but because of the people they helped along the way. And so, as the sun climbed higher into the sky, the adventurers continued their journey. They did not know what the future held, but they knew that whatever came, they would face it together, with courage and friendship guiding their way. For they were adventurers, and their story was far from over. Sound of the wind in the trees, the fading footsteps of the adventurers as they walk into the distance. And thus ends our tale. The boy was saved, the maze conquered, and the adventurers continue their journey, ever vigilant, ever ready for the next call to adventure. Their story is but one of many in the vast tapestry of the world, a reminder that even in the darkest of places, there is always light to be found. And so, dear listeners, until the next time we gather to hear tales of heroism and bravery, remember this: adventure is out there, waiting for those bold enough to seek it. Who knows? Perhaps one day, it will be your story we tell. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you've enjoyed the adventure, and we look forward to bringing you more stories of daring deeds and heroic quests. Until then, keep your wits sharp and your hearts brave. Farewell.